Washington. The graduating cadets at the United States Military Academy at West Point have lived in COVID-19 quarantine for the past 2 weeks, confined to their dorms, wearing masks and watching Zoom conferences on leadership as they wait for President Trump to speak at their commencement on Saturday.
Sent home in March because of the coronavirus, around 1,100 newly minted Army second lieutenants were ordered back to campus after the president abruptly announced in mid-April that he wanted to go through with his previously planned commencement address. The speech now comes during a breakdown in relations between the president and the nation's top military leaders, who have vehemently objected to Mr. Trump's threats to use active duty troops across the country to quell largely peaceful protests against police brutality.
In preparation for the president, the West Point cadets have been divided into 4 groups of about 250, with strict orders not to mingle outside their cohort. They eat in shifts in the dining hall, with food placed on long tables by kitchen staff who quickly leave. There are 4 designated paths for cadets who want to go for socially distanced runs.
To ensure an infection-free graduation ceremony, the cadets were tested for the virus when they arrived back on campus. 15 of them initially tested positive but showed no symptoms, said Lieutenant Colonel Christopher Oppart, a West Point spokesman. The 15 did not transmit the virus to others and are now virus-free, Colonel Oppart said, and will graduate with the others in their class. The ceremony, streamlined from previous years, will include no friends or family and is to be held on the main parade ground on campus, called the Plain. Around 10 a.m. cadets will be required to wear masks as they march in and take their seats, spaced about 6 feet apart. Once seated, they will be allowed to unmask. Mr. Trump, who has never worn a mask in public, is to speak at 11 a.m. The campus will be closed to outsiders at 6 a.m. Protests against the president are expected in the nearby community. The cheering cadets in full military dress will serve as a backdrop for a re-election campaign in which Mr. Trump, who is faltering in the polls, seeks to project strength as commander-in-chief. The president is certain to mention that he has increased funding for the military, but he is not likely to mention his disputes with the Defense Secretary, Mark T. Esper, and General Mark A. Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. General Milley apologized this week and considered resigning for his part in a photo opportunity with Mr. Trump after the authorities used tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse peaceful protesters near a church by the White House. Mr. Esper has publicly rejected the president's threats to invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807 to use active duty troops to quell racial violence. In an extraordinary rebuke, Jim Mattis, the president's first defense secretary, who resigned in protest in 2018, condemned the president's leadership. Never did I dream that troops taking that same oath would be ordered under any circumstance to violate the constitutional rights of their fellow citizens, much less to provide a bizarre photo op for the elected commander-in-chief, with military leadership standing alongside. Mr. Mattis, a retired Marine 4-star general, wrote after the church episode. Mr. Trump has long revered West Point, which is 6 miles from his high school alma mater, the New York Military Academy, a 131-year institution that was sold at a bankruptcy auction in 2015 to a nonprofit controlled by Chinese investors. I'm doing it at West Point, which I look forward to, the president said in April as he declared his commencement intentions, to the surprise of everyone, including the commanding officers at West Point. I understand they'll have distancing. They'll have some big distance, and so it'll be very different than it ever looked. Saturday's commencement will be the first since 1977 that will not be held in Michie Stadium, the West Point football stadium, which does not have enough room on the field for keeping 1,107 cadets 6 feet apart. The coronavirus has killed more than 114,000 Americans, and cases are increasing in a number of states as businesses reopen, although infections are sharply down in New York. Protests over the killing of George Floyd in police custody in Minneapolis are continuing across the country, and Mr. Trump is stoking a cultural divide with his Twitter feed. Army officials said privately this week that they were nervous about what the president might say after 2 weeks of racial tension that has roiled the country. Mr. Trump could wade further into the fierce debate over whether to strip military bases of Confederate names, as a Republican-led Senate panel demanded on Thursday.
Or he could make a surprise announcement about withdrawing troops from Afghanistan, they said.
Concern about the issue of police abuse have rippled through the campus in recent days. The West Point superintendent, Lieutenant General Darrell A. Williams, convened the entire senior class on the parade ground where commencement will take place to hear their concerns and talk about his own experiences as a black man in the Army.
General Williams elaborated on those views in a letter to West Point alumni, faculty and cadets last week, saying that, during these unsettling times, I want us to recommit to eradicating racism from within our ranks by treating all people with dignity and respect.
Residents who say they support the cadets and consider themselves part of the West Point community are organizing a protest on Saturday.
Dr. Ann Summers, a retired ophthalmologist who lives nearby in Montrose, NY, and one of the organizers of the protest, has for many years befriended cadets, offering home-cooked meals and a civilian shoulder to lean on, especially for cadets whose families live far from West Point.
Dr. Summers said protesters will join a silent vigil for democracy from noon to 1 p.m. Saturday outside the main gates to West Point. Protesters will stand on the sidewalk of the West Point Highway, masked and socially distanced every 10 feet or so.
Trump will be inside West Point doing a campaign rally disguised as West Point graduation, stealing the honor of these fine cadets and wrapping himself in the flag, Dr. Summers said on Facebook.
Laura Vetter, an instructor for 18 years at West Point before retiring last fall, said in a telephone interview that she planned to protest on Saturday, and speak on behalf of any cadets who were not allowed to make political statements in uniform. This commander-in-chief is such an abysmal exemplar of leadership that a statement has to be made.
Cadets do not lie, cheat or steal, or tolerate those who do, Ms. Vetter said, citing West Point's honor code.
The Army Secretary, Ryan McCarthy, and General James C. McConville, the Army Chief of Staff, will be the senior Pentagon officials on the dais behind the president. Neither is expected to make remarks.
In previous West Point commencements, typically attended by the president every 4 years, each graduating cadet would shake the president's hand. This year, the cadets will go up in pairs to a separate stage about 15 feet from the main dais and salute the president as their names are called, and Mr. Trump is to salute back.
One tradition will remain in place. After all of the names have been called and the class is dismissed, the cadets will be permitted to throw their hats high into the air.